Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be beginning shortly, but before we do, I just wanted to make a few housekeeping announcements. If you have a cell phone, please silence your cell phone or turn it to vibrate mode. In the event of an emergency, the exits are to the rear. In the event of an earthquake, duck and cover until receiving further instructions. And if you need the restrooms are out to the rear and to the left. And thank you for your attention, and we'll begin shortly.
Okay, let's see, what do we have? We have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, huh?
We have a quorum of 8.
We got 8.
If there might be some matters where it's a little tight, if there's some people need to recuse themselves, if so, then I'll let you know. Get a
Okay.
lookout for that.
What do we got now?
We have 8 now.
Yes, good morning, sir. How are you? I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board meeting of December 7th, 2018. I'm going to ask Mayor Mitchell if she would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Ready, stand, and begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Opening comments by any of the board members? Any opening comments?
Clerk, I just have a couple. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, chairing today.
Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to go to the auto show yet, so I'm curious if anybody did, but I was reading that 2019 may be the year of the SUV EVs. So I was just curious if anybody saw. I know that a couple of the companies are coming out, but I'm going to try to go tomorrow. But I was just curious if anybody had a chance to go over and see any demonstrations. Just curious.
I did see it. I have a picture of it on my phone, so I'll share it with you. Yeah, very interesting. Cal ETC had a lunch and panel, which I usually attend. And one of the things they're doing and have been doing for the last year is inviting the faith-based communities to their lunch and meeting, and the idea is to spread the word of electric vehicles and the programs that can help them get into electric vehicles. So we have a tour on the floor of electric vehicles because Cal ETC is the Electrical Vehicle Coalition. And one of the vehicles we saw was this autonomous SUV. It's built for an autonomous vehicle. It won't go out on the road as autonomous this year. I'm not sure which year it's planned to be out, probably another year or so. But I did also hear on the radio that Waymo has now introduced the autonomous vehicle in Phoenix, and you can order one up to take you somewhere. It's out there commercially. So a very good show.
And there was a list, and I can't find it right now on the computer, but it had about BMW, Mercedes, Kia, at least Porsche, Audi, at least 6 or 7 major companies are in production, and it said 2019, if not 2020, to
Yes.
hit the market.
And on
Right, we
you'll
expect
see-
a lot more models to be on the street in the next few years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Dinastri, any comments?
Thank you, Dr. Parker. I just wanted to bring to the board's attention 3 matters. One is the introduction of our mobile app. It's something that we're quite proud of, and I know that we have an example up there for people to peruse, but we're finding that we're getting tremendous recognition, and it's been applauded from the sense of the usefulness of the information that's provided. So we wanted to, again, make sure that as many people as possible are aware. We had the chance to meet with Supervisor Hahn's staff yesterday, and they all knew about the app, and were quite pleased with how they're able to access air quality information in a useful way that actually determines how you take your children out, where you exercise, and things like that. This is available from the Apple Store, South Coast. We're also working on an Android version, and we're going to continue to update this app, but it's been very well received, and just want to make sure that as many people are as aware of it as possible. The second item that I wanted to talk about was a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be in Washington, D.C. at the invitation of the US EPA. And in that, US EPA announced their intention to move forward on the heavy-duty truck rule, which is what we had petitioned the agency to do. I firmly believe that this will be the only regulatory action, or as they put it, deregulatory action, that this administration will do during its first term. It's exciting because it's exactly what we asked for, a comprehensive review of how the standard is being looked at. We have to be diligent, we have to be involved, because the issue will remain, what is that endpoint? And as a number of the participants and stakeholders discussed, and many of the board members have been in DC, meeting with the meeting groups, meeting with companies like Volvo, Packard, Daimler, the National Chamber of Commerce, a whole host and variety of different stakeholders that we worked with to get this administration to move forward. At the end of the day, whether they get to a .02 standard for the tailpipe emissions or some other point, it's something that we will be very diligent and very involved with. But it was at the approval and behest of this board that we were able to get this, and it's just a tremendous accomplishment, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. The other and final aspect that I wanted to touch on was that 2 days ago, we had our Ocean-Going Vessel Technology Forum. As many of you know, ocean-going vessels will be the largest source of uncontrolled NOx in our basin in the coming years. And we wanted to make sure that we've addressed this issue. And again, it reflects on the leadership of this organization. The fact that we're able to work at the federal level and bring about regulatory action is one thing, but now we're also looking at the international level, working with other foreign governments. We had representatives from Finland, Norway, from China attend this event, and there was tremendous positive feedback with regards to how different groups can work together to really leverage and maximize the amount of benefit that goes not just into our ports and to our area, but to all the port areas, and in particular right now we're focused on the Pacific Rim. So thank you very much, Dr. Parker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dinastri.
Mr. Chair, if I can.
Yes.
I just want to comment, if I may, and recognize Mr. Nastri's entire team on just your brief comments here. One, on the mobile application. It's incredible, it's phenomenal, it's a very a great way to share with our residents the ongoing efforts being made here at the touch of a button. I'm hearing from colleagues around the country through my National League of Cities efforts, municipalities are looking at finding ways to use technologies on real-time data, on looking at ways to educate and communicate with their respective communities on the lowering of emissions and finding ways to do just that. And then secondly, on the ocean-going vessels, want to applaud your efforts. Again, this is, finding solutions to lower our emissions in the basin, but we can't do it alone, clearly. Very similar to the homeless issue that the city of LA, just one city alone cannot tackle and solve a problem. It's got to be an international solution. I'm happy to hear other countries coming forward, expressing interest in finding ways to lower the NOx in the outgoing vessels. So appreciate the leadership and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Mr. SCAQMD?
No, wait, I wanted to second Joe's comments, and I'm going to be going to China in, I believe, late December. It's like 99% sure everything's for the Harbin Ice Festival. But I'll be meeting with some elected officials there, so if I can talk with your staff before I go, kind of this will be my 10th trip to China, so I can hopefully negotiate with some of the government officials. And I saw in item number 10 also with our staff report with regard to working with China on these trade deals and the international trade. So whatever I can do, I like to do that as I go over there, and we can include some of those in my PowerPoints and videos also. Great work.
We'll be happy to do so. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any further comments? Well, before we get started on our regular calendar, normally for those of you who come in once a month for the entertainment portion itself that comes from our chairperson, is that now you get me. Unfortunately, Dr. Burke is not here today because his sister passed away in Cleveland, and they're having a memorial service today. So I'd like for our board to take and kind of express to him, and I'm quite sure he's watching right now on his tablet, wherever he is, and making sure that I don't screw it up. That we will let him know that we miss him and wish him and his family all the condolences for his passing of his sister, which I had an opportunity to meet, and she's a very lovely lady. And but as time itself comes about, this is the passing away of another loved one of the family. Now we get a chance to do what is something that I think is just a wonderful kind of recognition, and that is to recognize people for being here for the length of times of 20, 25, 30, and 35 years of service. Many of the people probably have not even been born and lived that length of time. And in order to work for one organization speaks very highly of the work environment of this organization, for people to want to stay here for that period of time. So, Mr. Nastri, I'm going to turn this over to you and let you introduce those individuals.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. We're going to have our Assistant Deputy Executive Officer, John Olvera, go ahead and read the names of those individuals. John?
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Parker, members of the board. As we do at the end of every year, as Dr. Parker mentioned, it is my honor to present to you the employees who this year have reached significant milestones in their SCAQMD career. Some of the employees are in the audience today, and I'd ask them to please stand or raise their hands so that they may be recognized. And we're going to start with the 20-year anniversaries. Thomas Chang. Thomas is here. Zin Chen. Elizabeth Krebs. Eric Martinez. Martha Rivera. And Michelle White. Celebrating 25 years of service, Sam Atwood. And Shaw DeBerian. There's quite a few here with 30 years of service. El Baez. Sydney Baker. Teresa Banuelos. Penny Shaw Cedillo. Devorlin Celestine. Jay Chakrabarti. Mitali Dada. Alicia Diaz. Rosalinda Diaz. Raul Dominguez. Kennard Ellis. Javier Enriquez. Hiram Fong. Sally Jin. Tracy Goss. David Hauk. Richard Howrilu. Mark Henninger. Donald Hops. Saad Karam. Thomas Leibel. Lisa Mirasola. Thomas Moore. Tia Lee Pham. Jeanette Prudhomme. Ken Sanchez. Laki Tassopoulos. Eduardo Tung. William Wong. Vaskin Yardanian. Connie Yee. And Hushik Yu. And celebrating 35 years of service, Letitia De La O and Douglas Gordon. Please join me with one last round of applause for everyone. Congratulations to them all.
I'm going to say congratulations to all of you. I think that it goes to show the great job that the administration itself has done in order to make the working environment so conducive that people want to stay here for a long period of time. The unfortunate part about it is as they begin to mature, they want to retire. And that leaves a very big void for people who really have made a great mark in reference to making the air quality for all of us in our region better, in better health, for better lives for all of us. Again, congratulations, and as for the chairperson and for all of the board members here, we wish you 35 to more years of service itself with this agency. Now we get down to the situation itself that I really kind of like it that the chairperson is not here today, that I get a chance to do. And before I do that, I wanted to say something about the person that we're getting ready to swear in Supervisor Hahn, her predecessor. Supervisor Solis is not here with us today, but I'd like to honor the Los Angeles County Supervisor for her service to the South Coast Air Quality Management District. She certainly made a great impact, Mrs. Hahn, while she was here, and she did an enormous job espousing for her community, for her district, and for the County of Los Angeles. So knowing that you're going to be taking over, we feel that there will not be a void there, but we want to send out to her. I express a sincere congratulations and thank you for the effort that she put in. And now that I will say one thing before I go out and give the oath of office to Supervisor Hahn. When I saw her this morning, for the many times that we have met before over the years, I told her that one of the things that I don't have very many, other than that of pictures of my children, and obviously my wife, posted on the walls in my office. One of the ones that I do have is two pictures, one from her father. There was a father with Martin Luther King Jr. And that was one of the ones that, we had an opportunity to take a picture together as well. And I will always cherish that. He was one of the people that, when I was a very young person at that time, my hair hadn't turned black like it is now. But so I'm just honored to be able to swear you in today because I'm quite sure that he would be very honored to see you here and doing something that fulfilling, something that he always was very interested in himself when he was on the board. So with that being said, Paul, will you set us up there? And I'm going to ask you to join me down in the front. Whatever side that you want me to.
This is my better side.
All right. I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I, and then state your name,
I, Janice Hahn,
during such time as I hold the above office,
during such times as I hold the above office,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to join this esteemed governing body of the AQMD. I am the new chair of the County Board of Supervisors, and one of the duties that I have is to appoint other members of the County Board of Supervisors to various governing bodies in the county. And as you said, Supervisor Solis was ready to do something else, and previously Supervisor Kuehl also represented the county on this. So I thought it was a time that I took my turn and came here. And I'm really pleased because when I look back, when you talked about my dad, so when my dad was a young county supervisor, he decided that the smog that we had in Los Angeles was not a result of the manufacturing firms, but it was a result of the cars. And he had a series of letters that he wrote to Henry Ford, accusing him of making cars that contributed to the smog in Los Angeles. I'm old enough to remember the smog days that we had, and many times we were not allowed to go out for recess, and the burning that you felt in your lungs when you took a deep breath. And so he campaigned on that and actually was victorious, and now we know that cars are all equipped with anti-smog devices. Since I've been on the City Council of Los Angeles, I've been a member of Congress, and now as a member of the Board of Supervisors, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have been in my jurisdictional district, and I care very much about making sure that our ports are strong and are certainly the economic engine of this region, but we need to do more to reduce the emissions there. When my brother was mayor of Los Angeles, he and I went to China, and we signed the very first agreement for shore power to be used with China shipping. It was the very first ship that plugged in to the docks as opposed to being there and burning that horrible bunker fuel, which was extremely dangerous to our air. And then when I was a member of Congress, I was one of 2 members of Congress that drove an electric vehicle. There was only one other member of Congress and I that drove an electric vehicle. So I believe that this is where my heart has always been, and I look forward to serving with each and every one of you to do our part to try to make sure that everyone in our jurisdictions has a good job, but also has clean air. And I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you for sitting me next to my friend, Joe. We live blocks away from each other in San Pedro. Maybe we should carpool.
Carpool, for sure. Mr. Chair, if I
Thank you
may.
and welcome.
If I may, I am really excited about Janice's arrival to our board. I've had a profound love and respect for your leadership, Supervisor. Clearly, she indicated that she's my predecessor on the LA City Council, but in the time I spent as a resident of the harbor area, she has led on key environmental initiatives to fast forward to where we're at today. If we see the ports complex today, we've seen a 80% reduction of emissions, and it's because of your leadership, Janice, that has led us to the electrification of our cranes, and as you indicated, the plug-in of our ships, as well as getting cleaner fuel trucks coming in and out of our port complex. And I'm excited about this appointment, and I'm looking forward to working with you. You clearly have a wealth of knowledge in this environmental justice space, and you've been an advocate and a champion of not only social issues, but also environmental justice coming from all levels of government. And I'm looking forward to serving alongside you. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of the board here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, we get down to the real meat of purposes of what we will now begin to carry out, and that is a consent calendar, items 1 through 17. I think Mrs. Mitchell is going to assist me here today. I think we have some public speakers on many of the items. But is there any recusals of any of those particular items from any of the board members? Anybody wants to pull one of the items?
Should I go ahead?
Okay,
I got first
Dr. Liu?
first in queue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to pull item 16, which is the audit. I also am recusing myself from items in which people have made charitable contributions to my employer, Coalition for Clean Air. So I'm recusing myself from agenda item number 3 because the Port of Long Beach, Southern California Edison, UPS, and California Air Resources Board are potential sources of income which are materially affected by this item. Also recusing myself from agenda item number 4 because the California Air Resources Board is a potential source of income materially affected by this item, and item number 10 because of same thing, California Air Resources Board is a potential source of income materially affected by this item. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Mayor McCollum.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull item 10.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I'm
Rutherford?
recusing myself from agenda item number 3 because of a campaign contribution from Southern California Edison within the past 12 months.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I join Mr. Mayor McCallum in pulling item number 10.
All righty. Mayor Mitchell?
I need to state that while I do not have a financial interest or a conflict of interest in items 3, 4, and 10, I am a member of the California Air Resources Board, which is involved in those items.
Okay. Any further comments, recusals, pulling? All right, then we'll.
I'd like to move the
vote.
balance.
Second.
Second.
Will we have public comment on those?
Yes. Item number 2A, Harvey, Mr. Elder.
Is he commenting on multiple items?
Well, I think that, I think Harvey, you already know what the rules are relative to the multiple items. So you have 3 minutes, and let's see, how many items do you have?
Mr. Chair, just as a point of order, if he's commenting on items that I'm recusing myself from, I would like to leave the room during that. So
Let me see here.
3, 4, and 10, is he going to comment on any of those?
Yes,
Uh,
3 and
Yes,
10.
yes, he will be commenting on item number 10.
Okay, then I'll come back when he's done with his 3 minutes.
Okay, Mr. Elder, you have, let me just go through here and before you start and tell you what the number of items.
I can hardly hear you.
I'm sorry?
I can hardly hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse
I'm
me.
sorry,
You
Mr.
can
Elder.
hear me.
I said, I was going through and counting up the number of items that you want to comment on.
Yeah.
We got a whole, well, this is the difference, so we're gonna go through 17. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
There's 8 items in the consent calendar that you want to comment on, and I think you're given 3 minutes for all of those particular items.
And you,
You may proceed whenever you,
well, could you cite what items are
Okay,
those 8?
item
So I
number
don't have to
2A.
do that in my time.
setting a public hearing for January 4th, 2019 to determine that proposed amendments to Rule 1325, Federal PM 2.5, new source review programs are exempt from CEQA and amend Rule 1325. Item 3, develop and demonstrate near zero and zero emission vehicles and equipment ports. Item number 5, execute contract to conduct preliminary cost and economic impact analysis, proposed warehouse indirect source rules. Item number 6, issue RFP for engineering consultants to assess BARC for proposed rule 1109.1, NOx emission reductions for refinery equipment. Item number 8, issue RFP for consultant services for AQMD environmental justice outreach and initiatives. Item number 10, transfer and appropriate funds, recognize revenue, approve positions, issues solicitations and purchase orders, and execute contracts and agreements for mid-year budget adjustments. Item number 11, rule and control measure forecast, and AB 617, expedited BARC implementation schedule. Item number 15, lead agency projects and environmental documents received by AQMD. And those are the ones that are in the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. We've been coming to the district since '85, 33 years, and trying to get solar used as control technology. We've litigated with the district, and I have a copy of a 510-page appellate court clerk's transcript I'm entering into the record here, and any other contacts and with the district and state agencies, et cetera. At the last meeting, we said that solar is BARC, best available retrofit control technology. And it applies to the different sections in here, 716, and there's 6 and 10, and you have not included solar as a control technology. This is outrageous. We've been talking about this. We've been litigating for years and decades. At the last meeting, Adrian Martinez from Earth Justice said that he supports our position that solar be used as best available retrofit control technology. There's the whole district to retrofit. Zero emission vehicles, we've been talking with major manufacturers, Tesla and BYD. BYD said they can manufacture 5,000 electric Class 8 trucks a year. And this is, as of 2 years ago, they said they can do it in 6 months. And holding back on that, now they're saying 12 to 14 months. But also want to incorporate in environmental justice something that I did, the low-income solar equity program with Commissioner Leonard Grimes, first Black Commissioner of the PUC back in, submitted in 81, the first proceedings. Also, I want to say the fishermen, the Pacific West Coast fishermen are suing the oil companies, my brother and my nephew, commercial fishermen up in Oregon, and we're involved with this. And it's the first time an industry sued the oil companies, and their defense is that the regulators didn't stop them. The devil made me do it. Anyway, so that puts the state regulators, this entity, et cetera, right in the crosshairs. So these issues have to be included. Solar is part of anything the district does going on. Any comments or questions?
No.
And I think this has violated my rights by limiting and having to gang everything together. I should have 3 minutes on each item. Other folks haven't requested. Maybe they don't have anything to say, but I do, and especially for 1146. That's also in the record and plans and whatnot. Okay.
Stephen Masick, item number 2B.
Mr. Vice Chair, just to clarify,
Mr. Eder referred to the public hearing for Rule 1146. I just wanted to clarify that he and all the other members of the public that are interested in commenting on that will be afforded up to 3 minutes at the vice chair's discretion and the board's discretion.
I understood that. Messick, go right ahead.
All right, thank you. I didn't see the clock, so. First, we consulting company owners talk to each other, so we want, not just my company, but all of us collectively want to thank the staff for working with us. The first version of the proposed new Rule 1403 had some very problematic things in it that are now gone. So we've continued to work together. However, it's not finished. I don't think it's ready for you to vote on it. And let me give you some examples. Somewhere in there is the word any. I don't think you can have the word any in a technical and scientific document. There are other terms that are simply not defined. I've given you, by the way, I've got a one-page little handout. I submitted 20-some, 30, whatever copies up there. So you have those. So it has additional work to be done in cooperation with the consulting, environmental consulting and environmental contracting industries to get it ready for you to vote on. Those things would be great problems if put in place right now. You'd have confusion, litigation, all kinds of things that don't do really any of us any good, don't help air quality, don't help us, help you, help us all work together. So we're happy to continue that. It's just simply not ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any further comments on any of the consent calendar items? Hearing none, we have a, do we need to have individual votes, or is just?
I think there was a motion and a second on the remainder that wasn't pulled.
There was. I think I was the second. I think
You were.
Joe was the first, maybe.
Yeah, so the only two that we would have to deal with relative to those would be 2A and 2B.
No,
For the-
10 and 16.
10 and 16.
And 10 to 16.
Should we approve the remainder?
That's what I was asking, is that the motion itself is on those items itself, with the exception of those three.
Do you need a roll call, and I can do it by consensus?
We could do that by consensus.
Okay? Any objections to their approval? Hearing none, then those items itself are approved. Now we'll go back and look at item 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Catriona and Mayor McCallum.
Questions and comments. We're asking here for, in 10, for an additional 47.5 people to work on AB 617 implementation. In January of this year, we also asked for 36.5 people. Are these additional 47.5 in addition to those?
Mayor McCallum, it's Jill Wynot, Chief Operating Officer. Yes, sir, they are in addition to handle the significant workload for managing the emission reduction plans, the community steering committees, and all of the work that we have for our three communities for AB 617. So yes, it adds additional headcount.
With those plus the 5 additional reassigned positions brings it to 90 working on AB 617?
Yes, sir.
Are they working in a separate group? Or are they filling in for people who are leaving? What, that seems like a large number.
Yes, it is. It is a significant increase to our staff. We're almost fully hired with the initial 32, and then the 47 would be additional. Many of these are internal people that we have moved into working on AB 617. We have not formed a centralized division, but we've integrated these people in planning, monitoring, legal, all of our different divisions.
So you're telling me that these are not new hires?
They're new positions. There are some coming from people that have not worked here before, and there are some that we're using existing staff, and then we have to backfill those positions that they vacated. So they are new positions, new hires.
New positions, but not necessarily new hires?
In some cases, we have transferred staff or promoted staff into the AB 617 positions, but then we have a vacancy from wherever they came from, and we're hiring for those positions. So I don't have a breakdown of how many of the 30 that we've hired so far are brand new to the agency or internal, but we can get that for you.
It seems to me rather excessive, and if we're replacing people who are leaving with new positions, I can see that, but bringing on new staff, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go right ahead.
Jude, just before me, I'm sorry. Are you on cue? I want to thank Mayor McCollum. I had the same line of questioning. I see here there's a number of employees that's going to lead this AB 617 implementation. My question is, I know we have the money to make the equipment purchases. Do we have the budget to maintain them?
Let me go ahead and take the first crack at that, because the funding aspect has been one of the critical issues that we've been associated with from the very beginning of this legislation. As you know, we took the position of oppose unless funded, and we've worked very closely with the legislature on procuring funding for these positions. The positions that we're looking at filling, let me back up. When you look at 617, this is a major paradigm shift in how we provide air quality services to the public. We're going from a regional approach, which has been the way that it's been done since the development of the Clean Air Act, to a very localized, community-based approach. It's extremely labor-intensive. It's extremely labor-intensive from the perspective of we have to be in the communities, looking at what are the emission sources within those communities. We're looking at inventorying all the additional sources at far more lower levels than we have in the past. We have much more involvement. But with regards to the funding, we've gotten the funding from the legislature and the commitment to continue the funding. In fact, last year it was a 2-year commitment. The legislature we continue to meet with, and just last week we continue to talk about the permanent funding that will come out of the GGRF. All of these positions are funded. We've defined what we believe the mechanisms to look at this. Part of 617 in the future is looking at additional sources and toxics. Some of that will also involve additional fees that will also help offset some of the costs. One of the other aspects is the legislature required that we actually accelerate some of the BARC measures. The legislature's perspective is that those are issues that we should be able to address through our fee program. We defined and we explained to the legislature that there are a lot of challenges associated with that. But given that the legislature mandated that we do it within a certain time frame, that in part has also accelerated the need for additional people very quickly. So we believe that we do have the funding, but we're not being complacent with regards to maintaining that funding. So we're monitoring it very closely. The fact of the matter is we haven't been able to hire fast enough. We're not the only air agency. All the other agencies are competing for these people. Plus, we have the Air Resources Board coming to UC Riverside. And so it's very difficult for us to fill these positions. And the fact that we do have the funding now to do that, the community is expecting us to be out there in force to do that. So we believe we're looking at both the funding aspect, we're looking at the management aspect in terms of maintaining the appropriate vacancy rates so that we're within our budgeted amount.
As far as I understand investing in the human capital, but there are, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are significant equipment purchases on this item before us, correct?
That's correct.
I may have missed it. Do we have the capability of maintaining the equipment?
Yes, we do.
We do. Okay.
If you'd like some more information,
fine,
Dr. Misato can explain some of the
Got it.
mobile
Thank you.
platforms that we've pioneered.
On a lighter note, who budgeted Matt's coat? I mean, I've just been blinded by, I was
Matt, can you stand up? I want to
impressive.
see
Yeah,
that the pants
please.
match this outfit.
Thank you very much.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, and Todd.
It's impressive.
You know,
Back to regular programming.
I was going to point that out, but I thought it would be,
Clearly, someone wearing that coat wants it to be pointed out. There's no avoiding it.
Clearly.
Now, okay, I got to ask one more thing. Do the socks match?
I
How
was
about
going
the
to
socks and the shoes?
I was going to say, at least it's red, white, and blue.
Lord have mercy.
It's red, white, and blue, so it's very patriotic.
I yield my time, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I would like for staff to provide more information on the new hires and transfers, et cetera, that we're going to be doing for this program.
As you're explaining this, what percentage, if you had to say right now, that we're actually going to get from AB 617, from the state of California, to implement the mandate that we've been given through that particular bill, versus how much is going to have to come out of our operating budget, if you know?
We've been very careful in terms of planning how we actually implement this. And that's in large part why we've been so active in Sacramento. So for the last legislative session, the original amount that they were going to fund for the entire state was $25 million. And we had said that we need substantially more. That amount would have been sufficient just for South Coast alone. So through the support of Assemblyman Garcia, through the leadership, that number was actually increased substantially. And the leadership in the legislature said that they made a commitment to fund these programs. So at this point, we've been successful in getting the funding to fund all of the positions that we have. With regards to the vacancy rate and filling those, that helps us in terms of our overall budget because we're not spending as fast as we have and we're accruing that. That's something that we look at very closely, but we'll be more than happy to provide Mayor McCallum and others with the actual positions in terms of, because of the short timeframes, we've had to cannibalize, if you will, from within our own departments to transfer people over. But that means that we're not able to work on other rules that we have on our rulemaking calendar or other projects that we need to be working on. So we're trying to be sensitive to the requirements of the legislature, make sure that we're getting as much funding as possible and not extend ourselves over that level of funding that we do have.
Okay. Supervisor Rutherford?
Wayne, you've already addressed several of my questions about this, but I'm concerned about looking out into the future. We budget for this now, we move people around, we hire the new positions. How long is the state going to continue this funding? And I know we don't know the answer, but that makes it difficult to make this kind of commitment and restructure our entire budget and staffing when we have no idea if the state's in this for the long run.
Yeah, it's certainly a concern, Supervisor, that we have, and I think that's why we keep such a close eye on the budget. It's certainly something I know that many of the board members have expressed the fact that we don't want to necessarily do a deficit budget and why we were trying to keep at least neutral. So with the budget amendments that were being proposed, when you look at that long-term forecasting, the 5-year forecast, which is really where we start to see the challenges, we know that in the next 1 to 3 years that we're still positive, and it's always at that 4 and 5 year where we start looking into dropping below the 20% reserve. But in this particular case, given there are a couple of other issues that are looked at. One is the actual funding that we do get from the legislature, and then the actual funding that we receive from other sources such as settlements and penalties. We had a significant increase in settlements over the previous year. I want to say that was in the neighborhood of about $9 million. So we keep track of those funding sources, and we're very happy to report back to you sort of where we are on that. I know we could certainly do that on a perhaps semi-annual. I'm looking at Sujata on a quarterly basis.
Mr. Natras, when is the sunset date of AB 617?
There is no sunset date, sir.
So it would have to take a full legislative action in order to eradicate it from being supported by the state.
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a couple additional comments. And Wayne, it's on table 3, just the purchase of the 10 fleet vehicles. It's a minor issue. Page 8 of 17. 10 fleet vehicles for $310,000. I know when I first came on the board in 2008, and every time a fleet vehicle purchase came up, we'd purchase CNG or something. So I hope this time, with the technology advancement in electric vehicles, we're a big district, but I hope everything's electric. I mean, I think even hybrids are obsolete. I've still got the original hybrid, but plug-in hybrids are becoming obsolete. I hope we can purchase, whether it's the Bolt or these new, I just went online and there's at least 7 or 8 new SUVs coming out this year that are electric. So hopefully every vehicle, since we do have the infrastructure set up with all the charging stations out there, over 100 charging stations out where we had 6 when I came here in maybe 2008. What's the intent for staff? I hope we're pushing forward to be a great leader in all electric vehicles.
Yes.
Great, thank you, Matt. What kind of vehicles would you, I'm just curious, for what the demands are of our staff, if you got to get out to San Bernardino or Orange County or Riverside. I know I tested that Bolt and a staff I called when I was coming back from our Palm Springs, can I make it back to South Pasadena? And I got 240 miles back to South Pass, and I still had 35, 40 miles left. I was going 60 miles an hour. The windows were down, no air conditioning, but I made it. Is there technology out there to purchase vehicles we can actually use, Matt?
So we're looking very closely at the duty cycle. So depending on, some inspectors have to go much further than the range would allow in a day. So we have to balance all that in addition to the upfront capital costs and the cost of fuel. So we're looking at all of them. We're looking at fuel cells. One of the issues is also how much cargo capacity they need to have for each vehicle, right? So sometimes they carry a lot of equipment, and so we have to take that into account. Some of the newer electric vehicles don't have that much cargo capacity. So we're looking at all that, but of course our mission is to reduce emissions, and so we're looking at the cleanest vehicles that we can possibly get.
And if you can, as these new vehicles come out in the next year, if you maybe even have to wait a couple months till we get them, or be the first to adapt, or even call the manufacturers and see when they're actually coming out. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering if Matt's coat was powered by electricity.
Solar.
Well, at least you've got one great fan in the audience, Mr. Elder. Okay, any other further comments from any board member?
I'll move approval of the item, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any opposition? Hearing none, then that item is approved. Okay. I think that was the only item that we had that was
16?
16.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may,
yes, Ms.
I wanted to pull the audit item just to make sure that the board members were aware that staff did a wonderful job again. We got through the audit with a clean audit, and everything is looking pretty good. However, I wanted to bring to everyone's attention that our pension liability grew again during the last fiscal year that was audited, up to $219 million. And if you look at the trend on page 77 of the audit, you'll see that over the last several years, the audit amount of the pension liability continues to increase, and that we need to be just aware of that because it doesn't seem to be going away. We have to hope for some things to break our way, and we have to, in a couple of years, when we get the opportunity, start investing in that deficit to bring it down. But that's all the comments I had on the audit.
Just, Mr. Chair, just following up on item 16 and Joe's comments, I know in South Pasadena, about 8 years ago, when I saw the pension costs for a small city, they were in hundreds of thousands, and then they started going into the millions. I proposed, and council agreed, to set aside a separate reserve fund for pension liabilities or medical liabilities of employees. I don't know if we want to actually set aside a separate fund just so we keep our eye on a target as Joe's doing. I know we have undesignated funds. Just a thought. We did it at the local level, so it's always, when we have our budget meetings, we know this liability is increasing, but we've got this set aside where we try to put a little money in each year just in case there's one of those huge spikes before it levels off.
Well, I think staff can explain what the plan is. Is it 2 or 3 years that we can finally start
Well, we're actually doing that to a certain extent now, and in a couple of years, once we've paid off some of the construction bonds, we'll be able to do even more, but I'll have Ms. Jane Sujata explain that a little bit more.
Yes, Dr. Liu, we will, in 22-23, we'll pay off on our power pension obligation bonds. And at that time, the plan is to start moving, budgeting and moving money out into a debt service fund so that we have some reserves built up for that.
Can we start doing it now, even if it's a little amount in there, just open a separate fund so we can just start moving it over?
We
Whether it's
have-
$1 million a year or 500,000 or?
Yes, Mayor Caciotti, we do already have a debt service fund.
Okay.
Currently, we have $1 million. There wasn't anything in the budget this year because,
Right.
it was a balanced budget and we didn't have money. But we can certainly bring to the board action, as we see fit for the rest of the fiscal year, if we
Right.
can move
And
some
I know
money
we're-
into that.
We're proposing to restore those items that we had taken out because we had that surplus in the end.
Yes.
But that's not a bad idea that after the audit, if we see that we had a surplus from the previous year, even though we passed a balanced budget, that we consider doing that if there's an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and what we try to do is combine all of those and present options to the board, so the board will have the ability to decide where that money goes.
As many of you probably know, that I worked in the insurance business for 18 years and was in charge of acquisitions. One of the things, because of my mathematical background, I had a tremendous interplay with the actuaries. I recognize something very early for all of you who are in public office and elected and have to deal with these issues. It's a very simple, I should say, high-stakes problem that mathematically is only going to be resolved if the interest rates go up. You can't create a plan assuming a certain interest rate, and when it goes down 3 times as much, as an example, for every dollar that you put out, and if you charge 10% interest in 7.5 years, it will double. You're talking about millions of dollars of deficit in 7.5 years is going to go double. It's just mathematically the way of large numbers themselves work. You're not going to get an even number of pensions on the basis itself of having 1% and 2% and 3% interest over a long period of time and still having a program that you're issuing out that is assuming a higher return. Most of the pension plans were created years ago that assumed that you were going to get 6-7% returns. You're not getting that kind of return. These are problems themselves that are not going to go away by putting more and more money into them, because it's really, I read an article, and many of you may have seen it, talking about the DROP program the other day for police officers, et cetera. And people are making 2.5 times what they normally made because of wrong assumptions. That's what the problem itself is. It's a very simple problem. I used to come in and someone would say, how do we underwrite this particular book of business? We go through all these highfalutin type of assumptions, and the bottom line is raise the interest or cut the amount that you're giving out. You can't give out 85, 90% pensions at 7% returns for people who are living longer. Our President Bush is jumping out of airplanes at 90 years old. So how you can, I say that, and I'm not here, and that's not my job, and that's not why we're here today. But since you brought it up, it's a situation that is not going to go away, and I don't care how many millions of dollars that we put in or whatever it may be, the problem itself is going to get larger because exponentially gets larger. The number that we are deficient this year, in 6 or 7 years from now, is going to be double that amount. And we can't come up with an even budget off of today's situation. Anyway, you didn't ask me for that, but that's a gratuitous comment that I made. Yes.
notwithstanding your incredibly wise comments there, because I agree with them, but yesterday at SB Sarah, we had our actuarial and our audit of the actuarial reports presented. So our unfunded liability went down. We're funded now at 79.5%, working toward the 80 where 100's impossible. So we're almost at 80. We're doing really good. 8.26% market return last year, between 7 and 7.25 on the audited returns. So we're doing well. It's a stable fund. If you look at our smoothing, our losses in the 2008 cycle fall out a couple of years out, and the employer contributions should drop precipitously at that time. But of course, that doesn't anticipate what the next downturn does. But the fund is in stable and good condition, and we're taking care of all of our employees and retirees and members here.
With that vote of assurance from Supervisor Rutherford, please keep taking care of our money, and I'll move that we receive and file the audit.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, item 16 is approved. Okay. Took us a little while to get here, but we'll move on down to 1926.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull 21.
Okay. 21.
I'll move the other items. It would be 19 through 26, with the exception of 21.
Second.
Mr. Chair, we have public comments on a number of those items.
Okay, then I'll withdraw the motion.
Mr. Elder. Eder, I'm sorry. Mr. Eder, not Elder.
Better. 19, 20.
Actually, we prefer Eder.
Oh, okay.
Anyway. Mobile Source Committee, Technology Committee. There's 40% of the state is low income. They're using 35% earmarks for low income on, these different programs. So everything that's done, all of these contracts and whatnot for like solar electric vehicles and the solar, they get the tax credits and the write-offs and all these other benefits. Instead of going to the 1% and the insurance companies and whatnot, it can be out to folks and take advantage of that. Also, tie in housing and health, and there's two types of vouchers for Section 8. One that goes to the owners and management companies, the other one that goes towards home ownership, and this should be done in every city and county throughout the district, help for low income, are afraid about being homeless and whatnot. Also, like you talked about retirement, and it was De Leon for low income, and it's been started in California and half a dozen other states, and that this should be used as in an option. We talked about buying out Tesla instead of going to the Saudis, the murder, that we have a $1 trillion pension fund, and that for low income, middle income, get like a third, and the state take a third equity, and this be done and integrated vertically and horizontally into these, and emerging. You're going to lose jobs with artificial intelligence and whatnot, and there are other implications. But so this stuff has to be done. Now, also, I believe at the administrative committee last month brought up about the renewable natural gas and made comments against it, and then deaths from drug-resistant antibiotics. As part of the Solar New Deal that was in the 16 plan, 40 exhibits. So Dr. Burke questioned this. He questioned Wayne that you never studied natural gas as toxic. It's against the Health and Safety Code 53,000, 2B, et cetera. And it's never been studied, and there's a body count, 9 million per premature death, and they say 44,000 deaths a year, which is very low and mostly to PM 2.5. So anyway, there's big problems, and solar has to be integrated into all this about retirement and whatnot. We have to live off our solar income instead of killing ourselves. Anyway.
It's the only public comments that we have on items 19 through 26. Board's pleasure.
Okay, I will move approval of 19 through 26, except for 21.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, so ordered. Item number 21.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems to me that having 3 firms, lobbying firms, is excessive. I would think we could get by with 2, and that we would take the money that we spend on the third one and if you will, put it towards 2 of these. To have 3, to me, is, I believe, unneeded. 2 I believe would be sufficient, and I would ask that we consider taking this back to the legislative committee to look at coming up with 2 firms rather than 3.
Yes.
So,
Can we ask staff what the
As a-
strategy was in choosing 3 versus 2 or 1?
I think,
So as legislative chair, let me address that. Until a few years ago, we did have only 2, and then we added a third one. And the reason that all of them are good lobbyists for us is because they represent different angles. One of the firms is more slanted toward the Republican side of Congress. One is more slanted maybe toward the Democratic side, but they have Republican representatives as well. The Kadish firm, Mr. Kadish was chief of staff to Dianne Feinstein, and the other member of that firm was chief of staff to Ken Calvert. And so that's a good mix. And then the third firm that we hired are experts in environmental legislation. So we have a mix of people. We obviously don't use them on everything. They're segmented to specific parts of our lobbying efforts. And so we think we're well represented in Washington with these 3 groups.
Mr. Nastri, would you like to comment?
Well, we presented the options to the committee, and as the mayor and chair of the committee pointed out, it was the pleasure of the committee to retain all 3. I defended the selection of all 3, Mr. Chairman, because as the mayor just pointed out, each of those consultants bring a unique skill set, a unique constituency, or a unique aspect that helps us move forward. When we look at what we've been doing over the last 2 years in Washington, it's really been focused on getting EPA to move forward. That's one aspect of the heavy-duty truck rule. And I want to sort of cite that as example because it's a good example where all 3 of the consultants play a unique role. So the Carmen Group, although they're a bipartisan group, has extensive ties into Senator Inhofe and into this administration. And so they're very influential in getting us access to the administration, including at the White House and within the executive branch. Part of the strategy in terms of getting EPA to move forward on that role also included political pressure as well as developing a very broad stakeholder skill set. Senator Feinstein, as you noted, through Mark Kadish, office has been very instrumental. Congressman Calvert has also been extremely instrumental in having Dave Ramey, who was his chief of staff as part of Kadish and Associates, has really allowed us to work with the congressman and the senator to ensure that US EPA's budget was maintained. So even though the administration had zeroed out, for instance, the DEER program, even though the administration had greatly reduced the 103, 105 grants, even though the administration had greatly reduced other funding for EPA and for states and local agencies, it was through the relationships that we have through Kadish and Associates, through the Carmen Group, and as well as through Cassidy and Associates. Cassidy and Associates is the largest of the three consultant groups and probably has the most extensive ability to go, whether it is in Congress or whether it is within the executive branch. They were instrumental in getting us in to meet with DoD officials at the Pentagon on the addressing of hexavalent chrome and the use of hexchrome as part of the defense process. Cassidy and Associates was also critical in terms of helping us develop and identify various stakeholders, as well as to reach out to numerous other groups. So because of the broad skill set and because of the things that we're working on, not only just at the administrative level, but looking at what is the potential for developing an infrastructure bill that actually has a clean air component. We need to have the political access across both the Republican as well as the Democrats to try to develop a bipartisan effort. We think that with this new Congress, there will be more of an opportunity to actually see an infrastructure bill. And because of that, we want to make sure that we maintain as much flexibility and as much resource in order to reach all the various parties and try to bring out that. It is a substantial effort, but if we can actually move forward in the development of a clean air fund and the development of the regulations and moving forward, the return on those investments is significant. And so in part, that's why we were strongly recommending the three consultants that were there. And then as to the selection, that was the board's, I'm sorry, the committee's recommendation as well.
Supervisor? This is old. Oh. Okay. Maybe our clerk can make it go away.
If I might.
One of the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't disagree with you totally. I think all of that can be done with two firms. I just object to having three and putting our resources totally into two firms. We can accomplish the same thing.
You know, I would, oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would just say, based on my experience in Congress, I do think now with the sort of change of the control of the House, as you were saying, Wayne, we have tremendous potential and opportunities. I know when I was there, we tried many times to get a clean air component in an infrastructure bill, and it's very difficult. And I will say, I understand your concern about 3 versus 2, but you know, it goes back to, it really is about relationships. And you can have the smartest people or the most renowned professional firms and not be able to get accomplished what you want to accomplish without the relationships. And I can't speak to all the firms. I do know the Kadish firm very well, and it absolutely is about the years of relationships and being able to work across the aisle and work to achieve our accomplishments. I think, again, I'm new around here, so you know, I don't know, but I mean, I think you should, you know, we should just make sure that our agenda and our goals have been accomplished And if not, then it would be appropriate to make a change. But I think right now, the work is going to be tremendous back in Washington, D.C. And I haven't been able to say that for, I was there, we never got anything done. But now, I think there's an opportunity to get some stuff done, and we need to be right in the middle of it. And I'm assuming with all of your work on this, that these are the firms that you believe will be able to accomplish our goals. So I would be okay with these three firms, making sure that, we have an opportunity to evaluate whether or not our objectives are being met at the end of their contracts.
Thank you. Mayor McCullough, I, like you, was one of the ones who voiced the same concerns that you voiced 2 years ago. Then I was appointed to the Legislative Committee and also on the Admin Committee. And I began to realize something, that what I thought of how the system itself worked really was not how the system worked. I went back to Washington, D.C., and a person that I had read a lot about and didn't know very much about was one of the senators. And as I walked in expecting to have 5 or 10 minute meeting with him, I ended up having 2 hours with the senator. And I began to realize then that, as Supervisor Hahn is saying, it is about relationships. Who do you know, who they know, or whatever it may be that is there. Then I went back again and was able to meet senators in the cafeteria and talk about various different things. DARA was one of the hot objects that we talked about, and 2 of the senators who said they were really on the fence, we really were able to talk about it, and it was because of the relationships of 2 different of those firms that got me in to see 2 different kinds of folks. I'm talking about very staunch Republicans that I met with for 2 hours, and very pro-left-wing, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but what I'm saying is that of a completely different persuasion politically, that were really saying, yes, we believe that this is, and one of the things that I found out is, a lot of things themselves do not have to necessarily be down in bills, but we can do them in appropriations. I didn't know that. But really someone who had been there every day and had worked in those kind of environments understood that. I think, Wayne, and it may be the time for you to say, is that what kind of improvement we had in getting dollars, even in this, from the administration today, for air quality from Washington, D.C., that we had not been able to do in the past. I know I'm putting you on the line, but I don't.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how to frame it when you look at it in terms of this administration versus other administrations, and in particular the role that Congressman Calvert played, Senator Feinstein, as well as other members of Congress. I would say that what makes our position unique over the last couple of years is that there has been a very strong emphasis to defund and to reducing the number of personnel at the Environmental Protection Agency. So the 103, 105 grant processes that I talked about, for instance, when Congressman Calvert was able to come to our office just a few weeks ago before the election, we were able to show him the importance of the 105 grants in terms of, through the 105 process, we were able to acquire a scanning electron microscope or electron microscope that we are able to use in identification of various particles. And it was a good example of, had that program been cut, we would not have been able to have achieved or attained that technology and then able to deploy it so that we can provide greater service to our community. And it was the opportunity to see firsthand the results of what that funding actually provided that was very important to the congressman. When we talk about DERA, Congressman Calvert, again, has been a tremendous proponent of that program. And even though the program hasn't been reauthorized, as an appropriator, he was able to provide funding for that. In fact, in working with him, he was actually able to raise the level of funding over the last year significantly to $100 million. And I will say that when I was working at EPA and we were working on DERA, it was the intent that there would be $100 million a year for that program. So it was only through Congressman Calvert's efforts recently, and I think a lot of it had to do with our outreach, with the relationships that we've built, understanding the importance of that, as well as the ability to bring in other states that also benefited from that, that we were able to maintain that funding. Same thing goes for the targeted airshed grants. Again, because of our efforts, because of our consultants, we were able to keep the pressure on the agency to not only preserve, but to actually increase. And when I say to preserve and increase, that was directly as a result of Congress, where they increased the level of funding. It wasn't the administration, it was Congress that increased those funding. So that's why we want to make sure that we have the relationships both within the administration and outside. We try to maximize what the administration does, and where we think that there's an opportunity for more, then we can work with Congress as the appropriators to actually provide that funding. So in that sense, you know, I would say that, you know, roughly it's in the tens of millions of dollars that we've been successful working in preserving budget funds that ultimately come to the district, as well as to other agencies and other states.
And for $200,000, really to be able to get tens of millions more in revenue coming into the district to help us solve our air pollution problems in this district, I think is a very worthwhile investment, not just to have 3 different sources, but people that we can walk in and talk to and pick up and be able to ask them to go to bat for us. So that's one of the reasons why I changed my position on it, because I thought it would be to our benefit in the long run. And it has proven this out over this last year, which things were looking to be cut, but we were saved, even though the other people may not have experienced the same amount of dollars as we. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I run a nonprofit organization that does a lot of advocacy work, and quite honestly, if I had this kind of money to spend on advocates, I think I could take over the world, but that's a whole separate issue. You know, I know that we plan and take trips with board members to Washington, D.C. every once in a while. I think the last time I went was in January, and I'm not sure I wish that upon anybody, because January in Washington, D.C. is not very pleasant. But perhaps, Mayor McCallum, if you're interested, the staff should take you on the next trip, and you can meet with these lobbying firms and come back and let us know what you think at that time. Because, I mean, my experience too was a little eye-opening, just like Dr. Parker's, that when I went back and worked with the firms, I found that they did all have their niche within the Washington, D.C. community, and were very helpful to, among other things, get us to the White House, get us in meetings with senators and congressional representatives. So I would encourage you, maybe not in January, but to go back on one of these trips, and I'd be happy to join you if it works with my schedule, because I think it's useful for the board to have that experience, to get to know the representatives we have there.
And Joe, I would be happy to go anytime I'm invited.
Okay. I think we have a, do we have a motion?
I'll move approval.
21. Okay. I know that your opposition still stands?
I'm not going to tilt against the windmill.
I think we have unanimity then.
Okay. Then no objections being heard, that item is so passed. All righty. Now we go to our infamous public hearings. I'd like to make a statement itself on item 27, which has been pulled by staff, and so has item number 29. Now, let's see.
Excuse me, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes.
I believe on item number 27, the recommendation is to continue the item to the January board meeting rather than pull it entirely.
I'll move to continue the item to
Second.
January 4.
Any other-
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just wanted to check whether there was any public comment on the decision to move the item or continue the item from this month to January.
Mr. Etter, do you want to speak on this because this item is going to be continued until January? Do you want to speak on it now? 27.
Non-refinery flares.
Come on.
Hello, I'm Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. There's a problem with flares. It also goes to what they call the renewable natural gas from waste systems, feedlots, sewers, landfills. Like city of Santa Monica has 200 buses, and they all from a landfill in Texas. Anyway, you know, there's drug-resistant antibiotics in the system, and that hasn't been looked at in terms of deaths and costs. So what they're saying is, and they're getting incredible credits and lots of money on the low carbon fuel standard. And it's back to, do the emissions just go out there? And now instead of 20 or 25 times GWP, we got like 85. And from 90% is imported into the state, and it's fracked, and that had, instead of 2025, has like 105 according 8-10 years ago to study Howarth out of Princeton, Cornell. Anyway, when you just emit, you get these very high numbers, so you gotta burn it, but they should not get trading credits and whatnot, like on the low carbon fuel standard, for anything more than being burned, not just raw emitted, and it should be put into the ground. So this it has to do with non-refinery flares and any flares, or that they don't get credit for the emissions, especially the numbers have gone way up on methane. So, and in reference to reclaim, we did put in about the largest solar power plants in the world built by the Israelis, but within 100 miles of the district, by Luz, and they've been operating for 25, 35 years. And this was put into reclaim, and it was not analyzed, and it is totally ignored. And this is illegal, this is backsliding, et cetera, and has to be dealt with legally. We're willing to have settlement negotiations. Anyway, what's happening is, in case you folks don't know, there's two types of trading. There's for the low carbon fuels standard, and then there's the straight cap and trade, and that goes $10, $20 a ton. The low carbon fuel is like, it hang on to 50, I've heard numbers as high as 180 last week, $1 per ton in Sacramento before carbs on transportation fuels and whatnot, so.
Thank you, sir. Okay, a motion and a second to continue it. Any opposition? Do we need a roll call on this, or?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then it's so continued. So that those individuals, I'm going to exercise, unless there's a reason not to do so, is to go to item 29 and come back to 28, since there's a recommendation itself. Be withdrawn completely. This is not a continuance, is that correct, Mr. Nastri?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, at this time, we're pulling the item. At the direction of the board, we went back to the various parties. We were able to reach agreement. As you recall, this intent was to try to collect information. We've been able to reach agreement with a number of the facilities, and we'll be moving forward on collecting the data. And at some time in the future, if we're not able to continue in the fashion that we have thus far, we could bring the item back to the board for consideration. But at this point, we don't believe it's necessary.
Okay.
I'll move that we withdraw the item per staff's request.
Second.
There's being no public comments signed up for item number 29. Any opposition? Being pulled? Hearing none, that item is pulled and so ordered. Now we go to 28. I would like to make a public comment, Ms. Nakamura, before you start. In case if we have someone here, I know we received, all of us board governing members, letters from some of the refinery people in Whisper. I want to state that this particular rule that we're dealing with today, 1146.1, 2, and 1100, does not involve the refineries. Rule 1109.1 will involve the refineries, and it's not on the agenda for today. Now, anybody who wants to speak on any of these certainly is welcome to do so, and I just didn't want someone to be sitting around thinking that this is the refinery boilers, et cetera, is going to be included within this rule, because they are exempt from this particular rule, and they would be included in rule number 1109.1. That being said, then we will proceed with item number 29. We have some publics. Mrs. Nakamura, you want to make a presentation first, please. Go right ahead.
Good morning. My name is Susan Nakamura. I am Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning, Rural Development, and Area Sources. I'll be presenting to you today proposed amended rules 1146, 1146.1, 1146.2, and proposed rule 1100. So by way of background, the 1146 series applies to boilers, heaters, process heaters, and steam generators. Rule 1146 applies to the largest of these units, greater than 5 million BTUs per hour. The largest unit is 250 million BTUs per hour. 1146.1 is the next grouping of these units that range from 2 to 5 million BTU, and 1146.2 applies to the smallest units that are less than 2 million BTU. This is in part implementing control measure CMB05 from the 2016 AQMP, Air Quality Management Plan, and is also for us to meet our obligations under AB 617 in regards to implementing BART requirements. As Dr. Parker had mentioned, that the proposed amended rules do not apply to the refineries, nor do they apply to the electric generating facilities. The board adopted amendments to Rule 1135. It's an industry-specific rule for the EGFs, and then proposed Rule 1109.1 will come later in 2019 to address the refineries and the units at those facilities. Through this rulemaking, we've conducted an extensive process, public process, 7 working group meetings. At each of the reclaimed working group meetings, we had provided briefings on proposed amended Rule 1146 and the other rules in this package. We had come to the board for a set hearing in May, and there were a number of public comments that we received, and it required us to go back to look at the BART analysis. We did a more in-depth look, and we're returning today with actually some tighter standards on the NOx concentration limit for some of the units. We did brief the Station Resource Committee in April and October of this year. These two charts are showing the baseline NOx concentration limits. It's the NOx standard that units are currently achieving today. So as you can see from the reclaim, when we look at the average concentration for those units, there's 103 reclaim facilities that are subject to the rule. 65 of these facilities have units that are currently not meeting the BARC emission limits. Of those, there's about 140 units that are going to need to put on controls or replace their burners with an ultra-low NOx burner. On the non-reclaim side, Rule 1146 has been in place. These facilities are in compliance. The proposed amended rule will lower the NOx concentration limit for those for certain types of units. And so this shows you, when you look at that NOx concentration limit and the amount of work that facilities will need to do, the burden is more on the reclaim facilities. Overall emission reductions that we expect from the reclaim facilities is about 0.27 tons per day. Overall for the whole implementation of the 1146 series is a little over 0.3 tons per day. 1146.2, we're not recommending changing the NOx concentration limit at this time. The rule includes a commitment for staff to conduct a technology assessment. If this technology assessment concludes that we need to lower the limit, then we would go back to 1146.2 and lower the NOx concentration limit. If the conclusion is that the 30 parts per million is the appropriate limit and is still representative of BARC, then facilities would need to meet that limit by December 31st, 2023. Proposed Rule 1100 establishes a schedule for the reclaim facilities to meet the requirements under the 1146 and 1146.1 rules. Requires that for the 1146 and 1146.1 units that they comply, 75% of the units comply by January 1, 2021, and the remaining units by January 1, 2022. This is 2 years before the AB 617 deadline. The reason why we have 1100 is so we can coordinate the implementation schedule, because some of these facilities will have other landing rules that they'll be subject to. So by having a schedule for these units that are 2 years before the AB 617 requirement, then we know that for those facilities that have other equipment, as they come later, their schedule will probably be closer to the December 31st, 2023, the deadline under AB 617. Does allow an additional year to encourage facilities to modernize their units, to replace their units, gives them an additional year to replace the unit if they select that option. And then those units that are close to the emission limit, we allow them at the time that they replace their burner up to 15 years that they can comply with that lower emission limit. 1100, proposed Rule 1100 does include, identifies the key components for the reclaim facilities for the monitoring, reporting, and record-keeping requirements. There's no increase in terms of the stringency in the monitoring, reporting, and record-keeping. Title V facilities will continue on the same MRRs that they're currently implementing under Rule 2012. The non-Title V facilities will follow the 1146, 1146.1 monitoring, record-keeping, reporting requirements. Staff is working on a proposed Rule 113 that will include all the monitoring, reporting, and record-keeping requirements, and will encompass everything in regards to not only this rule but other reclaim facilities, and address the Title V MRRs at that time. So I'd like to highlight three key issues that you may hear today in public comment. One is in regards to the comment is that we should hold off on adopting and implementing any of the landing rules for the reclaim program until we resolve the new source review issues. Staff would not be comfortable with this approach. We have the commitment under AB 617 to move forward and to implement these rules by December 31st, 2023. That would put facilities in a very difficult position if we were to hold off until we resolve the NSR issues. We want to continue moving on the adoption of these rules. Staff is working with EPA, and we're making good progress. We expect to bring amendments to Reg 13 in probably the middle to the third quarter of 2019. Also, there is the option, in October, the board did adopt provisions in Rule 2002 that do allow facilities to stay in reclaim until we do resolve the new source review requirement. So that provision is allowed for facilities. Another issue that you may hear is in regards to the requirement for, and this is for fire tube boilers, that we're lowering the limit from 9 ppm to 7 ppm, and that those burner retrofits are not available. We are actually behind San Joaquin. So San Joaquin Valley already has this requirement. They have over 700 units that are currently meeting this requirement. We've looked at source test reports from San Joaquin as well as for some of our units, and we have well over 700 units within Southern California that are achieving this limit. And then the last issue is in regards to the cost analysis. We did receive a comment from one stakeholder, and we've met with this stakeholder this week, and the concern was they have a unique unit or a unique set of units that are dual fueled. We sat down with them and provided a little clarification of the provisions of the rule and the applicability of the rule. We feel that there's a path forward. I think we'll continue to work with the facility and kind of see how it progresses and explain to them what their compliance pathways are. So staff is recommending to adopt the resolution, certify the environmental assessment, amend the 1146 series, and adopt Rule 1100. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some public comments. Mr. Eder?
Hello, my name's Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. 1146, this series and stuff, they were back in plans going back to 79, and I think it was 82, and then again in 91, which we litigated in 92. It included solar for these various uses. Also in reclaim, we had the 354 megawatt solar power plants out by Victorville, Kramer Junction, Daggett. They built a 14 megawatt, then some 30s and a couple of 80 megawatts, 454 for like 20, 30 years, the largest solar complex in the world. The district's never been out there. We put the stuff in the record. They never evaluated it. It's paid for itself. It was put in for like $3.50 a watt. They had to finance each plant, go to Congress after Reagan killed the credits in 86. It's cost effective. It was then. It is more so now. The technology concentrating solar is being worked on a lot. There was been recent meetings and work with the IEA, and we've been working with the folks that ran these programs for DOE and trying to bring it back here to the district. I recently was last week at Strategic Growth Council. It's also run by Ken Alex, who also runs OPR, Office of Planning and Research for the governor, and said, talk to them about district heating and cooling, especially cooling with climate change and whatnot, and that this could be worked into this with reclaim and this series and 1121 and anything else that goes into heating and cooling, that you could have combined combined cycle. Anyway, it's cost-effective, it pays for itself. Solar's gone down 80, 90% in the last 10 years in cost. And there's all these other externalities. The big picture is, you know, we've got to make changes. There's the 3 reports that came out, state, federal, and international. That's incorporated in the reference here. And this is backsliding by the district. That's illegal. We had support from Adrian Martinez from Earth Justice at the last board meeting, and also from Mark Abramovitz with Dr. Liu. We need to take action and need to take it now. This is illegal. It's been around for a long time, and you haven't implemented it.
Thank you. John Mola?
Good morning. My name is John Loyler. I'm representing Shaw Inc. We make carpet in Santa Fe Springs. We employ about 350 people. It's a very complicated rule, and I came here to learn, not really to speak, but here I am, and I'll try. I'm reading the materials, and we have 2 boilers which fall into Rule 1146, and the rules would require our emissions to be at 5 ppm for NOx. And I see the materials say that there's an availability of 7 ppm NOx burners, ultra-low NOx burners. So I'm wondering, why is the rule set for 5 when the burners are for 7? And for you guys, the burner is the engine of the boiler, like a engine of a car. So that's where all the emissions come from. So to get from 7 to 5, you have to have SCR, selective catalytic reduction, which involves ammonia, and there's ammonia slip rules that are being added here. And the ammonia adds danger, you know, to our employees and to the housing around our plant. And it seems like an unnecessary risk. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Michael Carroll with Latham & Watkins, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Western States Petroleum Association and also the Regulatory Flexibility Group, which is an industry coalition that includes utility and aerospace, in addition to refining facilities. We submitted written comments on behalf of both organizations on this series of amendments last month. As indicated in our written comments, these particular rules and amendments do not significantly affect our member companies, but there are a number of broader issues that are arising in these early rulemakings that we think are likely to be present in future rulemakings on rules that do affect our facilities in a very significant way, including the proposed refinery rule, Rule 1109.1. So we are bringing these issues and concerns to your attention and to the attention of the staff sooner rather than later, in the hopes that some of them can be resolved before we get to the subsequent rulemakings. And I'm pleased to report that we are making some progress in some areas. We've had some productive discussions with staff at a much more detailed level than previously on the new source review issues. We still have a long way to go and are far from resolving what the post-reclaim NSR program will look like. But we are, I think, finally having some more detailed discussions on that, and we're pleased about that. Unfortunately, there are other issues where we appear to be at an impasse, including our view that we really need a more detailed, comprehensive assessment of the environmental and economic impacts associated with the transition as a whole, as opposed to on a rulemaking by rulemaking basis. And perhaps most importantly, staff's position that BARC standards could require the replacement of the entire piece of equipment as opposed to retrofit with air pollution control equipment. And we understand that the amendments before you today are not premised on replacements, but the staff report in response to our comments makes it clear that that continues to be staff's position, that is something that is permissible and within the agency's authority. If, when we get to the rulemaking on the refinery rule, the BARC standards in that rule are premised on equipment replacements, that will be a very significant issue for us. So again, not objecting to you taking action on the staff proposal today, if that's your inclination, but trying to be proactive about raising these issues, and as I said, hopefully getting some, if not all of them, resolved by the time we get to the rules that do affect us more directly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Susan Stark?
Good morning, Susan Stark with Marathon Petroleum. I wasn't really planning to comment today, but we do have a non-refinery water tube boiler at a terminal. And the previous language would have given that boiler, which is permitted at 12 ppm currently, up to 15 years to comply with the lower limit, or when 50% of the burners are replaced. That would also trigger it. We only have one burner, so when that is replaced, we would be meeting the new limit. However, in the language today, and I'm not sure when it was made available, I may just have missed it, it added a provision that the permit needed to be issued prior to 2008 to qualify for that 15 years or 50%. And when I saw it, I texted, I called our environmental person at the terminal. She wasn't in the office. She thinks, well, she says it was issued after 2008. She thinks it was 2013. She's just not able to get back to the office prior to this testimony. So I wanted to ask for clarification. There was a little uncertainty when we were looking at the rule. There is a category that was for all other units, and that was 30 ppm. We're obviously well below that. If we're in that category, we're okay. The concern is if we're in the other category, the compliance date, if you were issued the permit after 2008, as I'm looking at it, the compliance date was January 2014. So we would, it's just not clear, our situation. So I just wanted to go ahead and speak. So we reserve a little room to work with staff and make sure we're okay. We're in compliance with our permit, and we, of course, want to continue to be.
Were you asking, Susan, were you asking a question of staff relative to your particular situation or about the rule?
Well, about the rule and how it will apply to my particular situation. Okay. So, again, I can't tell you now the exact date our permit was issued, and it's just because I didn't see it till this morning. So again, I'm not sure when the changed language was made available, but in last month's version, it didn't have the tied to the permit date prior to 2008.
Yeah, well, 617 was passed in 1993, wasn't it?
No, on this 1146, the prior version of the rule, looks like it was 2013.
Can we get clarification from staff? I believe that the provision that she's referring to is covered by AB 617 requirements, right, for how much leniency can be given for the newer equipment for BART.
Yeah, so this is the first we've heard of this particular situation, so we're kind of trying to see where she fits in the 1146 rules and find that provision. I mean, we could try. It's hard to tell until we could find that out.
We'll get you an answer in a moment so that we'll continue.
Well, I guess that wouldn't just be my particular circumstance. Is that what you're saying? You couldn't allow the 15 years in any instance?
Why don't we get you an explanation in just a moment, and we'll continue on with our next speaker, Harvey. Oh, I'm sorry, not now, Harvey. You've already spoken on that issue. Okay. Mayor Mitchell?
Thank you. A couple of issues have come up from our testimony. One of them was the ammonia risk that the gentleman explained in his facility. Could Susan or Phil address that issue?
So in regards to the comment that Susan brought up, I think,
Susan, okay.
Susan Stark, I think what we need to do is, if you can come over and talk to our engineers quickly, because something doesn't sound right, because the limit for that unit should be at 9 ppm. So we're not sure why you're referencing a higher NOx concentration limit. So maybe there's something that we're missing, or there's something unique about that unit, or so we need to get a little bit more information about that particular unit that you were referencing.
I'll be glad to work with your staff, and as soon as my engineer gets back in the office, we can do that. And again, maybe it's simply that we fall in the other category that's 30 ppm.
Right. So,
It's just not clear. Okay.
yeah, that's what, it doesn't make sense to us based on the limits of the rule and the time frame of the rule.
Me either.
Okay. Okay, so there was another question in regards to the concentration limits for the gentleman that had commented. If they're over, their starting level is over 12 parts per million, they need to meet the lower concentration of 5 parts per million, and they would do that with SCR. If their current level is at 12, it wouldn't be cost effective for them to put on SCR. So they would go to a low NOx burner, and they would be required to meet 7 parts per million. So depends on where the unit's starting, current emission concentration is for NOx, in terms of where they need to land.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
So in regards to the concerns for ammonia slip, our agency has had a practice for quite a while now in regards to only permitting aqueous ammonia. We no longer permit anhydrous ammonia. There's other requirements with the fire department and EPA in regards to the handling of those acutely hazardous materials. But aqueous ammonia is far less hazardous than anhydrous.
Further comments or questions? Right.
I would move approval of the rule and ask the staff to continue to work with Susan Stark on the issue relating to her single boiler, apparently, that's a non-refinery boiler.
Second.
Roll call?
Yeah, I'd recommend calling the roll, Mr. Chair.
Is she here?
She's not here at the moment. We'll have to test her later.
Yeah.
Okay, that item is passed. Now we'll move on to our public comment. Harvey?
Hello, my name is Harvey Etter. I'm talking for myself, and I'm doing something personal here. I'm addressing this to those that have influence on the governor, Dr. Liu being an appointee, and also Dr. Burke. I want to deal with something that happened to me 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and about 20, and relate it to the big picture with solar. I'm asking for a pardon for the governor for a criminal record that I have. 50 years ago, in the spring of '68, after King and Kennedy were murdered, I had less than an ounce in my dorm room of marijuana, and I was arrested, and I was brought, this is UC Santa Barbara before I went to Berkeley, then Santa Cruz, and I got a felony. I was put in county jail. I was expelled from the university.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I suspect he's getting to the nexus with our agency, but I'd just remind Mr. Etter to make sure his public comments relate to actions that are germane to this body. Thank you.
Okay. 40 years ago, I had been transferred to Berkeley, and I went into Berkeley. I didn't say anything, but also I want that to be forgiven criminally and with the university that I'm not 86. In '78, I was active with the Abalone Alliance, had a local job with the county, Santa Cruz, a solar education person. Anyway, I was point person for a national anti-nuclear strategy conference, pro-solar, in Louisville, Kentucky, and went there, put on by some folks back east, people all over the country. I was told not to make any decisions unless brought back to the group. I was on a coordinating meeting, and I was told that by the people that put it on that they talked to Tom Hayden, asked him why he wasn't at the meeting, and he said because Harvey Etter's there with the Abalone Alliance, and he's an FBI agent. They asked me to step down from the coordinating group, and another fellow came in and was pitching for me. This is Stalinistic crap. To disagree with someone and call them an agent. This has heavy implications, and we had a decentralized, pro-solar local government groups, and it was purged. Also, Hayden was head from '78 to '82 of the Solar Council, a solar entity for the state. I was working with the PUC. For instance, there were 6 cities that were a solar municipal utility over at the Energy Commission, and they didn't have this information at the PUC. I had to bring it in. So also 20 years ago, I had neo-Nazis try to smash in my door. I hadn't been armed in a long time. I armed myself, and I fired a warning shot, and I ended up getting another felony. And I want release from that,
Mr. Chair.
And I think that this whole stuff was done 40 years ago. We could have converted to solar and done this, but there was this bad karma around and process, and anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Etter. Okay,
Mr. Chair,
yes,
a request to speak, if I could.
yes, go right ahead.
Just really quickly, Supervisor Hahn and I were talking, and she'd really like to have the opportunity to vote on her first item. So I'd like to bring back our last item
I
for
would move that we
reconsideration.
reopen the roll on that item. Do we need 3/4 of a vote for that?
That was my motion.
Oh,
Hold
okay.
on there. Jeez, you can second mine.
Yeah.
You second his motion.
I know, my very first vote, and I was in the restroom.
Yeah.
You know,
And I made a big deal of the
How's that
fact we were
possible?
testing to see if you could actually use the machine.
I know. How do you know when you can
I will
go to the restroom?
then, unless there's some reason itself, I will, as the chairperson today, exercise my first rule is to say that we're going to reopen.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a motion and perhaps a second for reconsideration of that item.
We
and-
need 3/4 of the, if I remember the procedures correctly, we need 3/4 of the board to vote in favor of that.
I suspect we would have that.
I hope so.
Open the vote.
Yes, we'll open the vote to
reconsider.
redo the vote for item number 29.
It was 28, wasn't it?
20.
Yeah.
20.
You're right, 28. I'm sorry. The record reflect 28.
Oh, she voted yes?
Now vote.
Now we
Vote again for.
Now we have to.
Now we get to vote on 2080.
Oh, that was.
Yep.
Now we're voting?
That was a vote to reconsider. Now we're voting
Oh,
for.
now we're voting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Lots of practice.
Thank you,
There we go. We can switch him next week.
Break him up down here.
Okay. Look like we're at the end of our agenda today. We're going to have closed session.
Mr. Chair, I understand there might be one public comment relating to closed session.
One public comment related to closed session.
If you could just call public comment, it doesn't sound like there's anybody present, and so I assume they're waiving any comment on public comment since they've left.
Okay.
On closed session, excuse me.
I had asked for that before, and he came down and spoke.
On closed session, though.
Oh, in closed session. Okay. Mr. Eder, do you want to say something about closed session?
I'd like to thank you, I'm Harvey Eder. I'd like to thank you for letting me say something about closed session. I'd never seen this option before. Apparently, it's legally required, or it wouldn't be there, knowing the tenor of legal staff. I've been involved with litigation with you folks, and this year, there's a lot of stuff that happened. Still in touch with the courts and different parties, and considering, what to do after what transpired today with BARC, your backsliding history going on for decades, and not including solar, not analyzing it, ignoring it. It's pretty outrageous. All this stuff, SCRs, well, I got an ammonia story. I was in '76. I invented the beer can solar collector.
So, Mr. Chair,
Excuse me?
I would just recommend that we ask Mr. Eder to limit his comments to matters that are noticed on the closed session.
What's noticed on the closed session? Well, this is litigation, right?
It's on the agenda.
This is litigation. I consider right now part of potential settlement agreements.
That item is
Okay.
not on the agenda.
Okay, well, I don't see, my case listed here, I see one from CB, Communities for a Better Environment, and we've got stuff in common with them and discussed filing with them. So I guess in reference to that, we have had comments about them joining this suit. Anyway, it's outrageous what was done. I mean, this demur aid issues, it is state law, it's state court, there's no issue there. And the whole process here stinks. This is not how you treat concerned, constructive citizens, voters. And I just want to say for the record that it was at a board meeting that Dr. Burke said that, I had support in one about a year or two ago, and that they wanted to call this, the solar programs, the Harvey Eder Solar Program. And I said, well, that's great, but
Mr. Chair.
Until we get the program together and implement it, something that's for real and not half effort, then I respectfully decline, but leave the option open in the future. So with that in mind, adios.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eder.
Oh, by the way, I want to say one more thing. I come from a family of Benz, and I want to talk to you later, because my dad and my nephew, all Benz, and my great-grandfather. All right.
Thank you very much. There being nothing else before the, do we go to closed session?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay, we'll convene in closed session and CC8.
It is necessary for the board to recess to closed session pursuant to Government Code Sections 54956.9 Sub A and 54956.9 Sub D Sub 1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation which has been initiated formally and to which the SCAQMD is a party. The actions are in the matter of SCAQMD v. Aerocraft Heat Treating Co. Inc., and Anaplex Corp. SCAQMD Hearing Board Case Number 6066-1, Order for Abatement. SCAQMD v. Anaplex, Los Angeles Superior Court Case Number BC 608322, Paramount Hexavalent Chromium. People of the State of California, ex-rel SCAQMD v. Exide Technologies, Inc., Los Angeles Superior Court Case Number BC 533528, Inri Exide Technologies, Inc., U.S. Bankruptcy Court, District of Delaware, Case Number 13-11482, KGC Bankruptcy Case, South Coast Air Quality Management District v. Top Shelf Consulting LLC, Los Angeles Superior Court, Case Number BC 676606, Inri Top Shelf Consulting LLC, U.S. Bankruptcy Court, Central District of California, Los Angeles, Case Number 218-BK11975-ER, Bankruptcy Case. It is also necessary for the board to recess to closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Sub D, Sub 2, to confer with its counsel because there is significant exposure to litigation against the AQMD. Letter from Stephen J. Olson, O'Melveny and Myers, LLP, on behalf of ExxonMobil Corporation, dated August 26, 2018. A report of the reportable actions taken during closed section will be filed with the clerk of the board. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.